All right, so I'm super excited for today's podcast. It's with Richard Diaz of IceCap Asset Management. He's also a member of the Looney Hour podcast that can be found on YouTube, Spotify, all major places you find a podcast. Richard is a true to the blue economist, right? So I wanted to bring him on, essentially, really simply put, to simplify a lot of the things that he says that basically illustrate a lot of the challenges that you and I and your peers face on a day-to-day basis, but he's able to actually like get the correct wording and really explain to you why it's been hard to make it along in Canada in comparison to other times in history. So I hope you guys enjoy. Don't forget to like and subscribe, share it, all that good stuff. Have a good one. You are definitely the expert, right? And so no, for too many. It's like a small, about like, let's say 75 to 100 people within my own network itself that tune in whenever they find it like interesting. As of late, with everything that's happening, with the conflict, obviously, over in the Middle East, as per usual. 2026, born too late to be in a war in the Middle East, born too just but yeah, no, honestly, so like first things first, the reason why I wanted to talk to you is that I have been listening to the Looney podcast for quite some time.
Looney Hour,
And
the Looney Hour
sorry,
podcast.
Looney Hour podcast for some time, right? I've been listening to it essentially because I found that you guys were able to actually illustrate a lot of stories and speak on a lot of topics that for some reason I always found were not really being covered in like I don't like they're not being covered on like, let's say, the CBCs and like your global televisions of the world, right?
Mhm.
And the reason why I wanted to talk to you, Rich, specifically, is that I find that you're able to, from a very technical perspective, really explain a lot of the challenges that I would say the millennial generation and the Gen Z generation are experiencing, right? Because one thing I found is, based on the fact that as I'm speaking to before, based on the fact that I find Canadian media is actually very like dispersed, or like, it's, I don't know, it's not very transparent, doesn't really speak to the point. I think that there's been like a lot of suffering that's happened with millennials and the Gen Zs that's not really been framed properly, right? And I like the way that you sort of like frame things in a very economic in very economic terms, right? So, for example, explaining how like productivity hasn't increased and basically how that correlates to, let's say, like the job market and things of that nature, right? But just to begin, I would love to begin, I guess, with a bit of a rundown of yourself. I'm assuming a lot of people that I listen to know who you are, but if you were to give your elevator pitch, what do
Sure,
you, yeah.
sure. Before we get down that path, I just want to say regarding CBC and most of Canada's media landscape, I'm always reminded of a quote by, I think his name's Lipton Upton, or I can't remember his name is, whatever his name is, but to quote the gentleman, and it's difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on not understanding it. And I think that is what, in my view, that is what ails Canadian media. They are not interested because they're paid to not know. And so that's something we can touch on and sort of unpack a little later. But with respect to me, I mean, oh geez, where do I start? I mean, right now I'm a portfolio. I'm sorry. I'm a global strategist or global macro strategist and assistant portfolio manager with IceCap Asset Management. We manage money for families all across Canada and the world. Um, so so that's basically sort of my day job. And then the other part of my sort of daily life is being a co-host for the Looney Hour podcast, and that's where we educate, entertain, and inform Canadians about what's going on in Canada, but also what's going on in the global macro landscape, and also in capital markets, and how that affects Canadians. And we've been doing it for, Jesus, almost 5 years now, which is crazy to think about. 242 episodes, 242 straight weeks. And each week we discuss sort of like the current events. We discuss long running themes. We challenge sort of received wisdom. We make fun of stupid government policy. And we bring on guests and experts to discuss really interesting and topics in depth. And we have a lot of fun doing it. We know we don't take ourselves too seriously.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, so that's sort of the rundown.
Yeah, no, and honestly, I think you guys are really discounting well, the value you provide, because I would say, especially right now, I find the prototypical question a lot of people are asking right now is like, how did we get ourselves in this position, right? And like you're 100% right. The Canadian media landscape, it's difficult to report on things when you're sort of, let's say, incentivized to not, right?
Exactly.
However, I do think like the question of, and excuse my French, how the fuck did we get here, as asked quite frequently, right? And the fact that it's not really been touched on, right? From like a mainstream perspective, I think you guys are able to actually add really valuable color right now. As a matter of fact, there's a lot of things that I sort of take from what you've been explaining in a lot of your pods, and I sort of share that with my network, and they're really able to understand it because it's their lived experience, right? Like the other day, I believe you mentioned something called profiteering socialism, right? Or something to that
I
extent,
think
right?
what you're referring to, if I can just interject, is that we privatize profits and socialize losses. This is one of the
Exactly.
reasons. This is one of the reasons why I think one of the main. I mean, I don't know. I think Canada has lots of problems. We can definitely, and I hope we spend some time on the opportunities and why we remain sort of positive in the long run. But one of the main problems is that there's just fundamentally way too much government involvement in all assets of our economy.
Okay.
And some people think of that as a way to protect working class people. And I fundamentally disagree. I think what that does is actually it protects the incumbent, it protects the large company, it protects the wealthy, and it protects people who are older in general. Instead of allowing sort of the creative destruction that should happen in any economy, when you do bad things, you get punished. When you fail, you lose your money. The insistence that we have so much government in all aspects of our economy does not allow for the failure of bad decisions. And what it also does is it allows individuals to profit from sort of from that situation. And so that's really what I think is one of the main issues in our country, in our economy.
So that's really great. And like what I wanted to do as well, is take this opportunity to take these to take like that to take that concept and really dumb it down, because I feel like there's a lot of people who understand it, right? But it's almost like that analogy of an elephant in a room and everybody's touching from a different angle, right? What would be an example of that? Like, let's say the layman could
Yeah.
understand
So here's the
that.
most recent example is that the condo market in Toronto. So you have a bunch of people who made speculative investments on the condo market in Toronto. This was due to unhinged in immigration policy from this particular government that remains in power, importing millions and millions of younger, less experienced people. And obviously, the real estate industry saw this and sort of projected out, and then they built all these sort of dog crate condos, and people were speculatively investing in them. And now that you've had a sort of a walk back on the crazy immigration policy that Canadians were subjected to, all of these condos are no longer as valuable as they were. Right? There's just a fundamental less demand for the given supply, and so the prices are falling. Now, instead of allowing the market to clear, allowing prices to fall for people who made those speculative investments to lose money and their equity, you've seen the government, the federal government, work in conjunction with the provincial government to effectively bail out that industry, to allocate money, to give them tax breaks, to try to stop the prices from falling. This is, I think, that's a horrific idea. What it does is it is basically a transfer of wealth from taxpayers all across the country to the investors in a very small and narrow market. Those investors should lose their money because they made a speculative investment that went wrong. Those prices should continue to fall. eventually you will find an equilibrium, and other people will be able to have an opportunity to invest in this asset at whatever the price in the market will bear. Instead, we have an allocation of your tax dollars to the speculative investors in Ontario, specifically in Toronto. And I think that that's criminal. I think that that's a horrific use of your money, tax dollars, money, etc.
So I agree with you. So let's play devil's advocate for a second. I have found in life that everything happens for a reason. Like, what would be some what would be let's start off with, like, what would be some rational reasons as to why the overdevelopment happened in the first place? Like, why did that? Because I feel like it takes like two to tango, right?
I don't believe everything happens for a reason. With respect, I don't think malaria has I would like to object to that as a functional rule.
Yeah.
We can discuss why. Like, what do you mean? Like, why did Canada import 4 or 5 million uneducated people into our country? Like, is that your question?
I'm gonna try to really water it down. There has to be some rational reason. I'm gonna use a lot of incorrect words, so like correct me.
No, go for it.
Right? Okay. So there has to be some rational reason as to why taxpayer money is being deployed to bail out
Yes,
these investments.
votes,
Right?
votes.
Yeah, votes. Okay. So
I mean, like, if you want to be really cynical about it,
yeah,
Mark Carney and the rest of the current government
yeah,
want to make sure that their voter base, which Toronto overwhelmingly votes for the current government and that party, remains on side. I mean, that's, as far as I'm concerned, that's the only reason they're doing it.
So, and then the other part of that, I'm just going to get straight to it. The other part that I want to touch on is that, like, the part that I also find nefarious was the messaging from the central bank about like 5 years ago during the beginning of the pandemic, when essentially Tiff Macklem came out and said that rates would stay down for the indefinite future, and therefore Canadians could feel safe about borrowing. Did that have anything to do with this at all?
Yeah, I mean, those are two separate things. Like, that was monetary policy. You could argue that it was too easy for too long. I think that's I think that's a failure. That's an ongoing monetary policy failure. And did that fuel the speculation, housing speculation across Canada? 100%. Did it fuel speculation in housing in Toronto? Yeah, absolutely. I think that would not be a particularly like heroic claim. I think everybody, I think could agree with that.
Yeah, 100%. And because, like, I guess like my thesis is here is that on some level that so, like, at that time, like, and maybe I'm incorrect here, but, like, let's say this. At that time, if you were in a position or if you had enough assets to borrow and take out a mortgage and get into the housing market at that time, let's say things didn't work out for you, is that tranche of people sort of the ones that are being bailed out right now via these, like, vulture funds or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a little bit of column A and a little bit of column B, in the sense that there's lots of people who've lost lots and lots of money. Like, make no mistake about it, right? That there's people who are walking away from their investments. There are developers that are going into receivership. There are, like, for example, there's thousands and thousands of homes in Brampton and in parts of Vancouver that are 30, 40, 50% underwater. So there has been a lot of pain in that housing market. So just let's make that very clear. I think if you were to ask me, I think pain as far as falling prices is a healthy part of any market economy. It's unclear if Canadians want that. But the answer, but sort of a contradictory answer to your question is that, yes, of course, like, if you allocate lots and lots of money to start buying up these condos that are underwater, yeah, of course it will help put a floor under these prices. That's just natural, right? I mean, you add a bid to a price, you're going to get some kind of it's basically trying to put a floor under these prices.
Yeah, and from my perspective, again, I'm what do I know, right? But like from my perspective, on a policy level, the continuous incentive or the continuous strategy to basically create a support line under the housing market. So I would even say, and maybe I'm wrong, okay, I would even say that the monetary policy during the beginning of the pandemic was indicative of sort of like providing enough liquidity to maintain some like safety of the housing market. And it seems like now these bailouts via these vulture funds, it sort of seems that like the bottom line from a policy level, at least it seems federally, maybe even provincially, is to protect the housing market, right? And it seems to me that that is having some extremely negative ramifications for Gen Zs and the millennial class, right? Pay no attention to my camera, that doesn't want to work right now. But essentially, my thesis is here, and let me know if I'm incorrect, is that these short term policy goals are actually doing a great job of, yes, saving the housing market up to some extent, and also saving, let's say, the voters who do vote for
Yeah.
the existing.
Yeah, that's it. I mean,
But
like
you're creating another.
overwhelmingly, it's older people who own homes. Overwhelmingly, it's older people who have a lot of their assets and their asset or the net worth, excuse me, in their home.
Yeah,
And, those people, maybe we're being a little bit simplistic, but it's overwhelmingly those people who vote for the current government. And so in a way, it's understandable. That government wants to stay in power. That's the only thing they, in my view, care about. And how do you do that? By making your voter base happy. So why wouldn't they bail them out? I mean, to me, it's a logical conclusion to, like that's it. I mean, so I mean, but this is as old as time. I don't think this is a particularly unique thing to Canadian politics. Do you know what I mean?
it's not, but I think like right now, and this is what I'm trying to say, I think right now the question is being asked more thoroughly of like how did we get here in the first place, right? Because to some extent I feel like we were like the analogy like that the Al Gore analogy of like the frog that's in the pot of water that you turn on the heater and then it starts getting hotter, doesn't realize that it's boiling water, versus if you throw a frog into a pot of boiling water, it'll hop right out, right? And I think that's the context of at least South Central Ontario, I could say right now. For my peers, a lot of people are asking the question of like how did we get here, right? And I feel
Well, how
like
did we get where? Like, what are you speaking about specifically?
so like because even like so my thing is like the displacement of assets or the mis like so like
But are
how,
you
like
talking
for
about?
example,
But sorry. I just don't understand the question. Like, when you say here,
yeah,
where is here?
the job market is terrible, right? Cost of living is out of this world, right? Rents are going down, but yet somehow still that doesn't actually help the cost of living. And the question generally is like, it was much easier for our parents 30 years ago to have a very straightforward path to not just success, but just like how to survive in Canada, right? And I find that for a lot of my peers, that question's become a lot more difficult, right? So, for example, if I could give a very anecdotal example, I have a stepsister. She has her undergrad, she has her postgraduate diploma. I'm pretty sure she got like something to do with a master's as well too. She just elected to move to Kenya, right? Because the job market here is so miserable,
For
right?
right.
And that's what I'm trying to say. I
So
feel like,
yeah,
yeah,
I think I can understand your question now. So how did we get to a situation where Canada has the worst economic growth in the OECD, except for Mexico and Luxembourg? And how
exactly.
did we get to the situation where the Bank of Canada in March of 2024 said that we have a productivity emergency? I
Thank you.
mean, the answer is, it's first of all, I wholeheartedly believe it's never just one thing. I think it is sort of the culmination of many policy decisions that are, I think, fundamentally against growth and out of line, sort of in denial of what Canada fundamentally is and will always be, which is a natural resource based economy. It is the end result of I'm sorry to be political, but of a political party that is uninterested in the oil and gas sector, that is uninterested in the mining and resource sector, and that was obsessed with and allowed for the mass immigration of low skilled, low wage people, among other things. I mean, and so and while simultaneously shunning foreign investment, because those are obviously sort of all related.
Yeah.
And I
Yes.
think in some way, so I don't believe it's just one thing. I think for a long time Canada was against oil and gas, and I would argue still are, which is insane because it's our most important export. Our regulatory environment makes it extremely difficult to open and operate mines, which is again completely insane. The mass immigration, changing all of the immigration laws in 2019 and 2021 to move away from high skilled, high wage immigrants to low skilled, low wage immigrants was an attack on the working class and the young, of which I've probably never seen ever. Because clearly, if it's just supply and demand. If you increase supply and you keep demand the same, prices fall, just like in the housing market, just like in the labor market. And that's exactly what happened to young people. Simultaneously, we have shunned foreign direct investment for years. That's partly related to mining and energy, but also partly related to difficulty in regulatory environments, and making it an unattractive place to invest in Canada because of tax
Could you
policy,
elaborate on that though? Could you
etc.
elaborate on that last part, please?
What do you mean? Which one? Sorry.
The foreign investment in mining because
Yeah.
yeah.
So I mean, like Canada, foreign direct in. So for a long time, Canada was very open and allowed for lots and lots of investment in the natural resource sector. Now, Canada has always had a much more onerous regulatory environment than, let's say, for example, the United States. In 2017, after sort of you got the crash out of the oil price, the U.S. lowered its corporate tax rate. Canada did not respond in kind. And not only that, they made it extremely difficult to open and operate natural resource and energy assets. So, for example, they changed
Why?
the Impact
Why?
Assessment Act. Why?
Why? Yeah.
Because I mean, there's only, I mean, I don't, I think climate change has melted everybody's brain, to be perfectly honest with you. I think none of the policy stances that they have taken have in any way reduced global energy consumption. What it has done, but these people, you can't, it's like a religious, in my view, it's a sort of quasi-religious belief, right? So
So
there's no, like,
sorry.
you're asking me to explain why the Liberal Party for 10 years tried to destroy the most important export industry in our country. I can't answer that.
Thank you. That's more or less what I wanted you to say. Because and this is what I'm trying to deliberate on. Right? Is like that question in itself. It should be is one that is one that a lot of people are asking. We were so into environmentalism that was super important. Meanwhile, there's a whole bunch of bombs going over in the Gulf, right? So what does that have to do with plastic straws, right? The incentive to focus on environmental sustainability, right, and the
No, but
effect
wait
of
a second.
how
Wait a second. So the environmentalism has become has went from a very wide and broad focus. If I were to define what I think is important environmentalism, I would think of
yeah,
things like biodiversity is something that we never ever talk about, but I think is extremely important. We talk about clean rivers and lakes. We should be talking about clean air, not CO2 emissions clean air, but things like SOx and NOx and other particulates. We should be talking about soil quality. We should be talking about, I mean, there's all manner of different things. But I think that one of the problems with the climate debate is it has basically sacrificed all other discussion about any other type of environment. Oh, we don't even talk about the oceans and how much damage, for example, China is doing with oceans and marine and fisheries and stuff. We don't even discuss that. But anyways, so like the key thing is like climate change has basically superseded everything. And in my view, again, it's a quasi-religious thing where if you're because it like instead of thinking about a more holistic approach to quote unquote environmentalism, the only thing anyone seems to care about is whether or not your emissions are going up or down. But the truth is, Canada's emissions peaked in 2007 and has been going down. We export coal to China, and which is the worst emissions producer in the world. China does not at all care about climate change or emissions. They continue to build a record number of coal-fired power plants. So that's like one of the biggest lies in the world is that China seems to care, and they absolutely do not. And so, and in order to do, and again, like another thing that's really important is like again, I don't know, I just don't know why, but I think that you can get some kind of like mass psychosis where people just fundamentally all want to go in one direction, and anyone who disagrees is considered a heretic. And
And that's the
so
part that yeah, that's the part that I don't understand, because I definitely, so I feel like, especially, even that argument has changed, and hopefully I'm not just going on a tangent here, but when I was younger, again, going back to an inconvenient truth, right? I remember like looking at smog reports in Toronto and be like, oh yeah, that's nasty. The smog is nasty. You know what I mean? That's terrible. We should probably do something about that, right? But there was never really any tacit, like direct example of like an effect on me. I have asthma, right? So I had issues when the air quality was bad. But again, I can't really say that like that was gonna have an effect on my life one way or the other. I could take a puff or I could stay inside. One thing I know for a fact though is that when I was younger and my sister was like finishing high school, one thing you could always do is go work at the oil patch, right? So if you're from Ontario, you could go get a job at the oil patch, make your 100, 150, 200K a year for 2, 3 years, and then come back here and do a general normal job. That's gone now. And I guess like what I'm trying to do is sort of like make this really on the ground conversation here. Because in terms of voters, what voters cares about emissions, carbon emissions? I can't
all of them
even
do. So many of them do. Odie, what do you? Sorry, wait, what?
like
Why do you? For
but
years, wait a second, wait a second. For years,
yeah.
like you could not question the narrative that we should exploit global oil and gas resources.
And
What shook people out of their stupor was the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Right, like people like me who have been arguing for years that Canada should be building for years and years that Canada should be building a pipeline to the
yeah,
west coast
yeah,
or across the east coast from Alberta to Ontario
yes.
have been called all kinds of horrible names. Only in the last couple of years, like in the last 2 years, have people said, "Oh, you know what? Maybe we should do this." So yeah, there was a complete like you're not in the investment world, but something called ESG, environmental social governance. There was an entire like there was an
You know,
entire sort of like stream of finance that said, well, if you invest in environmental social governance, that you're going to make more money. That was, of course, a total scam. I mean, the EVs stuff is, in my view, in Canada, has been a complete and utter waste of money. I mean,
yeah.
there was, and my view still is, a mass psychosis around fossil fuels. They are not going anywhere. And only in the last maybe a year in Canada have a lot of people sort of finally realized, hey, you know what, maybe we should build a pipeline. And even then, there's still no pipeline. You know what I mean? Like,
And that, but so that's what I'm trying to say. So actually, funny enough, I used to work at the last individually owned mutual fund company on Bay Street. The last two funds that they launched, right? Were two ESG funds. So that was like the last
yeah,
license
like
I actually got. Now the funny thing about it, could not for the life of us, could not for the life of us find buyers, right? Because the only idea of it, the only rationale, again, really simplifying on a high level, to buy an ESG fund, what I'm really simplifying, was everybody else is doing it. Capital flows are moving this way. There's going to be mandates for companies to have to do these things. Therefore, you're going to want to invest in this fund that's already invested in. And even at that time, I guess it just never even made any sense to me. Going back to what you're trying to say, it did seem like it was very religious. I was younger and I was being institutionalized. So they were telling me, hey, you need to focus on the environment. These are two funds. You need to sell these funds. I was selling these funds on the basis of I need to sell these funds. I'm going to read my RSI license and figure out the value proposition and see how it fits into the needs analysis of this buyer, right? But I didn't sit there and think to myself, oh, let me calculate how many emissions I did today on my walk to work. Like, I'd never thought about that at all, right? And as a matter of fact, and this is what I'm trying to say, to the policymaker that's never going to listen to this podcast, right? I could tell you that like 12 out of 10 people, and I use that number on purpose, right? 12 out of 10 can tell you how the economy is affecting them on a day-to-day basis, but they cannot explain to you any of these environmental programs and how they have any basis and any benefit to them, which is what I find hilarious. Because
but wait a second. They shouldn't have. I mean, this is the. I mean, again, I don't want to be. I don't want people to listen to this and think that I don't care. But
yeah,
my objection is not to be callous and reckless with our precious environment. My objection is to not acknowledge the trade-offs and to be super narrow in our in thinking of what does it mean to be environmental. So again, that's why I think of things like, biodiversity, like, there's a, and I think that also another like really interesting thing is like, ESG, for example, shunned nuclear power, right? For years and years, it was not enough to be it was not enough to be nuclear power. You had to be solar and wind. And so that to me is, that is not a holistic view of how one wants to reduce their impact on this, our only place to live, the globe, right? Like, if you want to reduce emissions, the most obvious and easy way is to get rid of coal and move to natural gas. But no, that was not allowed, right? So that's what I'm saying. It was a quasi-religious thing. There was purity tests, and if you didn't meet that purity test, it was also, frankly, a complete and utter lack of understanding about how useful oil is. Again, they shunned nuclear power. It took France years to convince Germany that maybe they should, designate nuclear power as green, which is incredible. Nuclear power has been working for 75 years, effectively producing nothing but steam as an output. You know what I mean? And so I think that there was I don't want to spend, I think we should like maybe move on, but like I think that there was too much emphasis on extremely narrow view of how the world must procure and use energy. And it was, of course, not only subsidized, but by push by the likes of CBC and Globe and Mail, National Post, and all the media outlets. The media in Canada think their job is to parrot and platform the government. And that's, in my view, that's not their job. Their job really ultimately is to hold the government to account. But I don't know why we went down this path. I think we're finally coming out of it, which is positive.
Yeah.
To answer your question on how did Canada get here, I think it was a lot of sort of naive policy, and ultimately it's been a complete disaster. And I think we're seeing the fruits of their bad decisions.
100%. And my question would be: is like the next generation the ones that are supposed to burden like the fruits of these actions? Because personally, from my perspective,
yes, that's exactly what's going to happen. We already are. No one rich, no one old. Everybody old is wealthy or going to die soon.
Yeah.
So, or both.
Yeah.
So, if you're, and they're not affected by lack of foreign direct investment. They're not affected by importing millions of unskilled low wage labor. They're not affected by crime in the same way that working class people are. Right? So like if you go down the policy decisions that have been made over the last 10 years, they've had a disproportionately bad impact on the young and working class. They have. And the people who vote to perpetuate these people in power are old and wealthy. And so but because they have an air of moral superiority to it, nobody has challenged any of these policy decisions except for maybe me and a couple other people.
Which is great.
I think
it's amazing.
Because let's say if you really care about working class people, you do not import millions of low skilled, low wage laborers. And like this has been understood for time immemorial. But for example, I'm a big fan of Bernie Sanders, despite the fact that I might disagree with Bernie on many policy decisions. In 2014, he argued that open borders was a right-wing conspiracy theory to destroy the labor market. And like, what did Canada do? We did the thing that Bernie Sanders says was a Koch brothers conspiracy. Koch brothers, if people don't know, are like this arch right-wing group from the United States. And so Canadians, the Canadian politicians, under the guise of, empathy and trying to grow the economy, did the worst possible thing for young people and working class people. Another thing that's really kind of horrific is working class people rent and don't buy because they have no money. So what happens when you import millions of working class, low skilled, low wage labor? They go and rent and push up rents. And so the people who own the building make lots of money. The people who live in the building get screwed, right? And so that's what happened. And so, it cannot be understated how much damage was done to working class people and young people by the Liberal Party's open borders policy. I mean, it's just it is obvious. It's not only obvious from an anecdotal perspective. There's a lot of research from the Bank of Canada and other sources that have demonstrated that it was true.
Yeah, 100%. And I definitely agree because it felt like almost like people are putting a thumb on your progression while allowing
Yeah,
other
of
people
course
to
they are.
carry you, right?
That's exactly what happened.
So, but the other thing I'd add too, right? Obviously, the border policy and the immigration policy have been huge, have been massively terrible for a lot of people as well too. But I'd also add, like, would you not agree that there's also like almost effectively a bit of a barbell for millennials, specifically millennials versus Gen Z, because there are the millennials who were able to put themselves in a position where they were able to themselves also benefit from the asset appreciation. And
Well, yeah, I mean that's right. I mean, the truth is, like, there's a lot of talk about race in Canada, and I think that totally misses the trick. My parent, I'm a mixed race kid. I never really dealt with it. My sister might disagree with that. Where that bifurcate. That's okay. You're allowed to have a different agreement, but I think the fundamental the real fault line in Canada is not race, not religion. It's not even age. I think it's like whether or not you bought a house before 2016 or 17. And if
Yeah.
you bought a house and you had a little bit of money in the stock market, you think everything's going great
Yeah.
because your house is doubled and the stock market's up 3 times and whatever. And I think if you were too young, or if you're working class, or frankly, you just didn't have enough money because of circumstance, then you've been totally screwed. And I think that to me, that is the main fault line in Canada. And I think virtually every policy that the Liberal Party has done over the last few years has exacerbated that fault line and not made it.
100%. And this is the part that I basically wanted to talk to. And so this is OT speaking. This is not Rich. Okay. I don't want you to like fall on this, right? But something I've definitely realized too as well, I immigrated to Canada in 1999 from Kenya, right? I've grown up in South Central Ontario. So I moved basically everywhere in Southern Ontario, right? One thing I've definitely realized is that like your in group is very important, right? So whatever that is, like the group that you're in is important because they're essentially what's going to help you with career appreciation.
But that's always been true.
It's always been true, right? And so something like I always realize, okay, for the black population in Canada, it's about 4% of the population in Canada is black. Surprisingly enough, 11 to 15% of those black people live in Ajax Pickering, regardless, right?
Have a what? Sorry.
So 4% of the Canadian population is black. 11 to 15% of that population lives in Ajax Pickering.
Cool.
Just a fun fact, right?
That's pretty cool.
Fun fact there. But something I definitely realized was that I came from African parents who were very much so about like hard work and meritocracy, and you put that work in and you're gonna get whatever you get back out, right? In reality, really simply put, realizing that they would have it would have been much easier if they just levered up, bought a house for me, and then we went on with our day, right? I'm really simplifying that, right? But what I'm saying is that like I've definitely realized that like there is a level of exertion that I and my peers need to basically put out to make an ROI in terms of like how to live well in South Central Ontario versus just sort of being on that route of having the connections to be in real estate and get in the market at a very early stage. Because then
wait, Odie, I mean, if my dad was listening to this, who was also an immigrant to Canada, also from Africa, he would say, life's unfair. I mean,
into my mom, get along right well.
I mean, so I'm not. My suggestion is not that everybody is going to have an equal outcome. That is not possible. Nor, and in my view, I would argue, not even desirable.
Yeah.
The question is, what is your government making things easier, or is it making things harder? And you and I would probably agree, maybe if not, then please correct me, but that it was easier to get ahead in Canada 10, 15 years ago. And the government has made it actively much, much more difficult for people to get ahead because of keeping interest rates too low, because of restrictive and for shunning investment, for destroying energy and natural resource projects, for mass immigration. I mean, on and on it goes. And so the question is, so yes, in-group is good. I mean, I get all that stuff, but like, it's not that life will ever be fair, but it's like, is your government making things better at the margin? And I would argue that no, they've made things much worse at the margin.
Exactly. And I'm really happy you brought that up and corrected me. That's because that's exactly what I was trying to get to here, right? And I feel like that message is what's sort of lost between the boomer generation speaking to the millennial and Gen X kids,
Of
right?
course.
Is exactly what you said right there, right? And again, the reason why I like speaking with you is that you can very materially explain, hey, via A, B, C, D, E, this is why like the it's much more difficult to get ahead in comparison to the timeline when you were here, right? And that's just really what I
But also
appreciate about how
and
you.
then the thing is that you have a in my again not you, we started talking about the media. I think you have a situation where the media is basically gaslighting young people into
Yes.
into saying, oh, everything's just fine and blah blah. But it's like, no, it's not. It's like it's just not like it's not just fine. You have youth unemployment. Is at a 30. If you adjust for participation rates, is at a 35-year high. That's not okay. You know what I mean? You have companies, coffee companies that will remain nameless, that are importing people to go work in a coffee shop en masse, hundreds of thousands of people. We don't need to import people to work at coffee shops. That's crazy to me. You know what I mean? And I think that is affecting young people, by not encouraging investment in key industries. You are hurting the productivity of Canada. Productivity is analogous to affordability. You know what I mean? Those are not my words. That's the words of the Bank of Canada. By not encouraging competition in key industries, telecom, energy, transportation, banking, you are making things more expensive for Canadians. And again, like, who does that hurt the most? Rich people don't care about carbon taxes, right? Rich people are rich. They'll just do whatever, they drive the Range Rover. They don't give a shit. Young people and poor people are materially impacted by inflation and the cost of living. And so by making things difficult, making it difficult for companies to invest, by raising taxes, by adding complexity to our economy and reducing productivity, you are ultimately hurting working class people and young people. And that's and fundamentally, but the problem is, Odie, is that they're going to keep voting for them because house prices are up and stock market's up. And so what you need to do with your time, I think, and energy is to encourage young people to vote for real change, is to vote for a different philosophy about where Canada and what direction Canada is going. Because I think you cannot, like, we're seeing all of this, like, fake growth being exposed. The idea that the only way you can make money in this country is if you buy real estate. That's not a productive asset. You know what I mean? Like, if the only way that Canada can grow is by importing millions of people. That's not a sustainable way of improving the life of a working class person. The only way you can do that is through investment and improving labor force productivity. And
and,
so,
and
but that message is not coming through because young people are not voting for a different vision of what this country should be.
Well, and to be honest, so first things first, I truly think that like you're doing like God's work or whatever you want to say.
No, no, no. I
I'm,
mean, I don't
I'm
believe in
being
God, so
honest because what you're, no, I'm being honest because what you're saying about gaslighting is basically what I'm speaking towards, right? Everyone that I talk to that's my age cohort or younger is asking that question of like, man, I know we're feeling these things, but for some reason it's not being spoken on. And on top of that, when I elaborate on it, I'm being told to shut up, just be positive. It's on you, right? This
yeah.
weird negative accountability like loop, right? And I really like, and I like the fact that you're able to illustrate the challenges that are being put forth to this generation because I don't think, as a matter of fact, I'll drive down and say this generation has no problem with working hard. This is the most talented, right? Overeducated, ambitious generation possible. Living in downtown Toronto and working with all these startups, going to like networking events like Fuck Up Nights Toronto, there's all of these small startup companies that basically are trying very hard. These really good operators that are trying so hard to basically thrive in an economy that's working against them. And I think like why I'm trying to say you're doing such a great job is that it's their challenges are never really properly illustrated. As a matter of fact, they're told that they're insane for even imagining that they exist, right? So I think
I mean, I agree. I mean, I agree with you. But like a perfect example of what we're seeing now is like there's two things that are going on right now. So the CRTC wants to tax US streamers to pay for Canadian content. That's crazy. You're Canadian content. Do you think you're going to get a dime from the CRTC to promote your channel? No, of course not. That money will go to production companies in Canada that are well established that no one cares about or is watching.
Yeah.
Right? So that is a perfect example of socializing the cost and privatizing the profit. Right? So like and instead of the government saying, you know what, we should just allow the best Canadian content to survive and thrive through the process of sort of natural selection or whatever you want to call it, through the market forces, they're not doing it. They're putting they're putting their thumb on the scale, and they're the ones who decide who should do what and where. So another example is subsidizing the media to the degree which we do, newspaper media. So again, if you give millions and millions and millions of dollars to newspapers and journalists, they're never going to criticize the government. It is beyond insane to think that government, so that media, newspapers that are literally given them billions of dollars are going to turn around and criticize the hand that feeds them. It's just not going to happen. And so it just happens all over the place. And so, you know what I mean? Like, it just, to me, it's I think fundamentally we need a wholesale change in the leadership of this country. But you know what, Odie? Until young people get pissed off enough and actually outvote the boomers who are fat and happy, we're never going to get a change.
Well, that's why I'm here. At the end of
Like, if you imagine, think about it. Like, let's say you bought a house in Toronto in the 90s for $500,000, right? That house is worth $3 million today. Your kids have already gone to college. Your pension fund is topped up. The stock market is already up. Who knows? You see crime, but you live in a beautiful leafy neighborhood, so the crime is not near you. It's on Jane and Finch or what, you know what I mean? Yeah. Whatever. Well, you're not going to vote. You're not angry enough to ask for change. In fact, not only that, you're actually really happy with the situation. So you're never ever going to vote out the incumbent. You just won't.
Yeah. Well, on the topic of crime, it's really interesting because I live at the heart of downtown Toronto, and I'll tell you right now, the homeless scenario in the heart of the financial district is hairy. And to see, this is the craziest part, when you're it's hard to ask people to do change from a policy level that spend their day walking over a homeless guy that they're not sure he's dead or not, right? So
no, what do you mean? That should encourage them. But why is Olivia Chow still in power? I mean, another perfect example of to me, listen, I was born in 1985. Let's just say that I'm not unaware of the drug scene. Okay, giving people hard drugs is a freaking terrible idea, dude. How this
actually, it's to be honest, and the only people who may possibly think that that's a solution are the people in strategy. They're not actually on the ground,
right?
And I have a very close and personal relationship to this that I will not mention, but I'm telling you right now, it's the people that sit in executive offices in strategy that make these projects, right, to deal with homeless people by giving them a place to go shoot up. It turns out all the other homeless people from bumfuck nowhere come there now too as well.
Yeah,
it's
now crazy.
The area is infiltrated, right? And there's no actual rationale into strategy into looking into it. I'm getting besides the point here, right? But I definitely agree with you, right? From a policy perspective, it's important for this generation to vote people that are in power. See, my question to you though, you brought up Olivia Chow. I have a friend, his name is Corey DeVille. Corey DeVille's running for mayor of Toronto, right? Every time Corey DeVille has in any sense tries to basically market himself, he's treated like a joke. And I find he's not treated like a joke because of anything that he's saying. He's this big, tall, black man, powerful guy. He speaks well, and everything that he has to say is pertinent to the people that are living in the city. But it's almost just the fact that he has the ability or the let's say the audacity to challenge an Olivia Chow or to challenge whoever the existing regime is. He's immediately demolished. You know what I mean? And my question is how do you even navigate around that? My strategy here is conversations like this.
You just got to keep going. I mean, eventually what's nice about reality is you can ignore it for a long time, but eventually eventually reality asserts itself, I mean, yes. For a long time, the perfect example to me is fossil fuels. You know what I mean? For a long time, everybody said, oh, fossil fuel consumption is going down. Fossil fuel consumption is going down. That's not at all true, right? And it is, that's just, it is not true. Everyone who said that is wrong. Maybe in the future, in 50 or 100 years, when everyone has a nuclear power plant on their block, we will move away from fossil fuels, God willing. But this idea that we're going to solar panel and wind farm our way to the end of coal was always stupid and is being exposed as right now. And so, to me, I think I think things often take longer than we expect and we hope, and I think patience is very difficult in this scenario because there's real lives at stake. I mean, just think about how many people have died because we legalized drugs. Just think about the families that have been destroyed. Think about how much money, how much tax money we've lost, how many hospitals we could have built with the royalties from coal, from fossil fuels in Canada. How many schools we could have built, how many teachers we could have paid for. So the problem is that eventually either it will change. I don't know. I'm a child of immigrants. I will always be optimistic. That Canada really can maintain its promise. I just think you need young people to stop mucking about and vote out the people who've destroyed this country. I think that's fundamentally it. I mean, and you could argue, people have said to me, Rich, there's been some changes at the top. It would be intellectually dishonest for me to say otherwise. Yes, there has been clearly some changes with respect to how, natural resource extraction and stuff. I don't think it's fast or far enough. And I don't think it's, and I think it's cold comfort to the many people in this country that have had a really rough go. But I think that their crappy philosophy has been exposed at the farce that it is. And so, how did we get onto this? There's like, the Looney Hour is not, for people who've never heard of the Looney Hour, we're not as political. I think you kind of suckered me into that conversation, which I'm happy. Sorry. And so I don't want people to think of the Looney Hour as some kind of political diatribe. It's not. We really do genuinely talk about mostly economic and stuff. But I think that Canada is at a crossroads, frankly. It's funny. So many people blame Donald Trump for what's going on in Canada. And I think obviously that's a media spin. I think 90%, 95% of the problems that Canada is facing are structural in nature. I think, and my evidence for that is the Bank of Canada's repeated speeches and papers that started long before Donald Trump was even elected, never mind inaugurated. And so I think the way that you deal with structural problems is you make structural changes. You have to acknowledge that those problems exist, and you need to make wholesale structural changes to philosophical visions of how Canada is led, and I really fundamentally all I care about is working class people, because my mom and father, they came here with nothing. They are ultimately working class people, and Canada has been run for the rich by the rich for a long time, and they of course the irony of course is they don't see themselves as that because they're the left-wing party, but I would submit to you the proof is in the pudding.
Well, that's awesome. We can leave it at that. This has been a great conversation. I really appreciate this, Rich. And that's it for today. Any final words?
Go Habs, go.
Okay, go Habs, go. All right, that's awesome.